Welcome back. We're going to continue with the ISE installation series with ZTP. Today we will look at the different methods that can be used to deploy ISE in VMware vCenter server. If you haven't watched the video on how to create the ZTP image file, click here to watch that before proceeding. Don't worry, I'll wait. As you can see from this table, there are 4 different methods that can be used to deploy a virtual machine to vCenter server. We'll go through all 4 methods in this video. The first method is to use an ISO file that is stored on your local computer that will be mounted to the virtual machine for the installation. This is a good option for deployment of a single virtual machine. I'll be installing ISE using the ZTP file in an ISO format for this. First, some notes about the ZTP process in vCenter server. You have to add a secondary DVD drive for the ZTP configuration file. If you choose to use the .img format for the configuration file, you need at least version 6.7 update 3J, and you have to change the firmware option to BIOS. To start, open vCenter server. Right-click the host onto which you want to install ISE and choose New Virtual Machine. Give the virtual machine a name. Choose Compute Resource in the Datastore. Set the guest OS to Linux and choose Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. At the Customize Hardware window, choose the number of CPUs to use, the RAM, and the hard drive size. Choose the network to connect, and add a new DVD drive. Now you click on VM options, expand boot options, and change the firmware to BIOS. Pro tip: to ensure that you can map the ISO files, enable the Force EFI setup option. This will boot to the BIOS when the virtual machine is powered on. Once your virtual machine is created, you can select the virtual machine and open the console window. Once the console window comes up, you can power on your virtual machine. Remember that we set this to boot to the BIOS. This is so that we have enough time to map the ISO files. Right-click the first DVD icon and choose Connect to Disk Image File. Then you can select the ISE 3.1 ISO file. Repeat these steps to map the ZTP configuration ISO as well. Wait for both DVD icons to turn black before exiting the BIOS. The default option, though not listed, is to install ISE using the ZTP method. This option will automatically be selected after 150 seconds. Once the ISO portion of the installation finishes, you can see that it boots to the setup prompt, and the information here is already filled in thanks to the ZTP configuration file. Now all we have to do is wait for the ISE installation to be installed. Of course, this process is shown sped up quite a bit, and this is the only time in this video that I'll show the entire process. At this point, you can see that a symbolic link is created. This is where the repository that we created in the ZTP file is accessed, and the patch and hot patch is downloaded and installed. Once ISE reboots after the installation, go ahead and log in using the credentials that you set in the ZTP configuration file. Now you can issue the show run command. This is the easiest way to verify that the parameters you set in the ZTP configuration file were actually configured on the ISE installation. Now we're going to use the show version history command to see what patches and hot patches have been installed. As you can see, this command lists both patch 1 and the log4j hotfix. The other option is to use the show version command. I don't like to use this command because it only shows the patch that is installed. It doesn't show any hot patches. Before we can verify the services that we have configured in the ISE ZTP configuration file have been enabled, we need to check the application status. So if we issue command show application status ISE, we'll be presented with this list of processes. As you can see, most of the services are not running, and this is because we've just installed ISE. It takes about 15 minutes for all the processes to initialize and start running. What we're looking for is the application server process. Once that is in a running state, we'll be able to access the ISE web interface. After waiting about 15 minutes, I press the up arrow and enter to run the show application status ISE command again. As you can see, the application server process is now running. Now we can access the Web GUI. Open your browser and point it to the IP address that we configured in the ZTP configuration file. You'll get a security warning because there is no public certificate installed on ISE at this time. Go ahead and accept that risk and continue to the ISE login screen. Log into the web interface using the same credentials you used in the CLI. Once logged in, click on the gear in the upper right hand corner and choose About ISE and Server. This will show you the patch that has been installed on ISE. You can close this window and go to Administration, System, Settings. Choose API Settings, and then API Service Settings. You can see that both the ERS and the Open API settings are enabled. From here, let's go to Administration, System, Deployment. Once you get there and get rid of this dialog, you want to click on the node in your deployment. Scroll all the way down to verify the settings for PXGrid and PXGrid Cloud. For this next process, we will be uploading both the ISO file and the configuration.img file to the local data store in vCenter. This is a more efficient way to install multiple VMs from the same source, as the VMs can just point to the file that is shared. Again, there are some notes about the ZTP process in vCenter server. You have to add a secondary DVD drive and map the ZTP configuration file. If you choose to use the .img format for the configuration, you will need at least version 6.7 update 3J, or you will see the error shown. You also have to change the firmware option to BIOS. In vCenter Server, select the host onto which you install ISE. Select the data store view. The default data store for that host should be selected. I'll upload the ISO file into my ISO folder. I'll choose the ISO file for ISE 3.1. I'll then create a new folder, and I'll name this folder ZTP. I'll upload my ztp.img file into this folder. Once these files finish uploading, we can install ISE the same way we did in the last method. The difference here will be shown on the customized hardware screen. Once you add the second DVD drive, choose Datastore ISO file for the primary drive and select the ISE 3.1 ISO. Then, for the second DVD drive, choose a ZTP image file that we uploaded to the data store. At this point, expand the options for the DVD drives and enable Connect at Power On. Remember to do this for both drives. Remember to change the firmware to BIOS. Now, we don't need to boot to the BIOS in this method since the files are already mapped to the drives. Once the virtual machine is created, we can select the VM from the list and open the console. Once the console opens and connects to the VM, we can power on the virtual machine. Remember that the default installation option for ISE 3.1 is the ZTP process, and even though it's not listed, it will automatically be selected within 150 seconds. And now we can see that the configuration was set through the ZTP image file. Once this installation finishes, you can verify all the processes and services the same way we did in the last method. The third option is to upload an OVA file to vCenter. This is faster than an ISO installation due to the fact that the base OS is already installed. Once the OVA is imported into vCenter and powered on, it is ready for the configuration and to install the ISE application. Cisco has made VMware deployments easy by allowing you to leverage pre-packaged ISE virtual machines. They are uploaded with different size options based on the SNS platforms and give recommendations for the node role based upon the OVA chosen. To import an OVA file, right-click your host and select Deploy OVF Template. Now you have to select Local File to choose the OVA you've downloaded. Once you give the VM a name and choose a compute resource, you'll have to specify the size of VM you'd like to deploy. This will automatically assign and reserve CPU, RAM, and hard drive sizes, as well as set the firmware to BIOS. Then you can choose the data store and network before creating the VM. The progress bar shown here will let you know when the VM is finished being deployed to your vCenter server. Then we can right-click the VM we just deployed and select Edit Settings. In this virtual hardware window, we're going to go down to the DVD drive and we're going to change it from client device to Datastore ISO file. Here we're going to go to our ZTP folder and map the ztp.img file to our DVD drive. Remember, once this is mapped, to expand your DVD drive and choose Connect to Power On. When we go to the VM options file, we can see that the firmware has already been set to BIOS. Now we can open the console and power on this VM. You can see that the OVA file will boot directly to the setup prompt, allowing the ZTP process to run, or for manual entry of all the configuration details. Finally, we have a command line option using VMware's OVFTool. You have to download and install the OVFTool, and then you can build your command. We will also be using VMware's native APIs called VM Data to input all of the ZTP information for this deployment. To use the OVFTool method, create a checklist of all the information we needed to import the OVA: VM name, size, network, data store, and OVA file. You also need the vCenter server username and password, IP address, and vSphere host IP address. Remember that as a CLI tool, any entry with a space will need to be enclosed in quotes. Also note that if you are using the @ symbol in the username, such as I do, you need to use the encoded %40 for the command to work. OVFTool sees the @ symbol as the beginning of the vCenter address and will give an error and fail at this point if you do not format it this way. Use this information to create the command that will be used by OVFTool. I staged this command in Notepad, which makes it quick to copy and paste into the CLI, and also to change the VM name to deploy several VMs at a time. Moving back to the virtual environment, you can see that I have my command in Notepad. I'm going to copy it here and then paste it into command prompt. Once I hit enter, the process begins and you can see the virtual machine show up in the list to the left. The creation of the virtual machine is also shown in the recent task pane. You can monitor this for the progress of the installation of the virtual machine, or you can monitor the progress in the command prompt as well. Now that that process has finished, we're going to go ahead and create the ZTP configuration file, taking advantage of the native APIs built into VMware using the VM data. Now, this is the configuration we're going to use, and we're going to copy this, and then we're going to go over to the Base64 Encode app, and we're going to paste it in here, click Encode, and then we're going to take the encoded text and go back over to VMware. The reason we're doing this is because VMware requires Base64 encoding to take advantage of their APIs using the VM data. Choose your ICE VM and click on Edit Settings. Once this window comes up, we're going to go to the VM Options tab and we're going to expand the Advanced menu. Scroll all the way down here till you get to the Configuration Parameters and select Edit Configuration. Then we click Add Configuration Params and to give it a name. The name must be guestinfo.ice.ztp. If it is not this exact name, then this process will not work. Paste in the value that we copied from the Base64 encode page and click OK. Click OK again, and we're ready to turn on the VM. Let's open the console first, and then we can power on the virtual machine. You can see that the VM boots straight to the setup script with the configuration parameters already completed, giving you the confidence that the virtual machine is being installed correctly. Even though we're using the VM data for this installation and the configuration data, we are still installing patch 1 and the log4j patch in this process. If you like what you see here today, go ahead and click that like and subscribe. I'll be doing a lot more videos like this in the future, including 5 more in this zero-touch provisioning series detailing every platform on which ICE is supported. Questions and comments are welcome. All the links that I've used today, as well as further documentation, will be in the description. Thank you very much.